Hello and welcome back to another lecture. In this lecture, we are going to create an RDS database using CloudFormation. So up to this point, we have created our template for the VPC and the NAT gateway. In this lecture, we are going to create our template for the RDS database. To start, open your text editor. And the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to save the template. I'm going to choose File and I'll select Save. I'm going to save my template as rds.yaml and press Save. And once you've saved your template, another thing I want you to do is open the Management Console. And in the Management Console, go to CloudFormation. In CloudFormation, make sure you create your VPC stack and your NAT gateway stack. So just create that for now. So when we are done with the RDS database, we are just going to create the stack. And that's what I've done. I've created my VPC stack and my NAT gateway stack. Another thing that I've done is I've opened the RDS console here, and I want to use it as an example to show you some of the resources we are going to be creating in our template. Let's start building our template. I'm going to open my text editor. Then I'm just going to dock this next to it. And as we did in our last lecture, let's open Google. And in Google, type CloudFormation Documentation. And I'm going to select the AWS CloudFormation Documentation. And I'm going to select User Guide. I'm just going to open this. I'm going to select Working with Templates and select Template Anatomy. We are going to scroll down to the YAML and we are going to copy our template sections. I'll copy it, come back into my Sublime text editor and paste it in there. We are going to delete the sections we don't need. And for our RDS database, we don't need outputs. I'll delete it. And we also do not need transform, conditions, mappings, rule. I'm going to delete them. And these are the sections we need to create our RDS database. I'm just going to clean it up by deleting this at the top. And I'm going to delete this information at the bottom. The first section we are going to start with is our template format. So in the CloudFormation documentation, I'm going to scroll down, select format version, and all you need to do is copy this number and paste it here. Next, we are going to create our template description. And I'm going to say this template creates an RDS database with MySQL engine. We are going to skip the metadata section for now. And the next section we are going to create is the perimeters section. Just like we did in the other lecture, I have created a reference template for you for the perimeters. And in this reference template that I call RDS perimeters, you can download it in the description. I have included all the perimeters we need to create our RDS database. And another thing I did is I have added the perimeter logical names. So these are the unique name I created for those perimeter. And I've also included some properties for those perimeters that we need. So what I want you to do is copy all these perimeters and paste them into your template. And we are going to fill in the value as we go. So I'm going to copy all these perimeters. Start from the bottom. I'm going to copy everything and copy it. Make sure you don't copy the perimeters because we already have it in our template. I'm going to come back to my template and I'm going to come under the perimeter sections, press enter, and I'll come back to the beginning and paste it there. And once you've pasted your perimeters, it should look like this. Now we can start filling in the values. The first parameter in our RDS template is the export VPC stack name. And we covered this in the NAT gateway lecture. This parameter allows us to import some values from our VPC template. So that's what this parameter is. The next parameter is the database instance identifier. And this parameter logical name, this is a name I make up. So you can call this anything you want. And the properties under it, these properties came from the CloudFormation documentation. For example, if I go back and I'm going to select parameters and scroll down to properties, you can see the properties, allowed pattern, allowed pattern. So these properties came from the CloudFormation documentation. And let's start filling in these properties. So what this database instance identifier would do is, if I go to the RDS console and I try to create a database, I'm going to select MySQL and I'm going to select free tier. And you can see under settings, the database instance identifier. So that is what we are creating the parameter for here. So the first properties we are going to enter is allowed pattern. And to create an allowed pattern for this parameter, you will enter it like this. And this is how you enter it. Whenever the user is entering the database identifier name, the first character has to be a letter. Then after that, you can have a combination of letters and number. And if you look under the database instance identifier, you are going to see the information down here. And the information is just telling you what type of characters to enter in here. We are pretty much doing the same thing in our template. The next property we are going to enter is the constraint description. And the constraint description is similar to the allow pattern. It is just a description that lets the user know what type of characters to enter in here. And if you look in the RDS management console, they have the constraint description here. So in our template, we can enter something like this. The next property we are going to enter is the default value. So if you look in the RDS management console, you can see there is a default value in here when we try to create an RDS database. And any default value we put in here will be in that box when we try to launch this CloudFormation stack. I'm going to call the default value MySQL DB. And for the next property, we are going to give this parameter a description. I'm going to call it instance identifier name. The next properties is maximum length and minimum length. If you look here and you'll see them right here. So in here, we are going to enter the maximum length as 60 and we'll enter the minimum length as 1. And for the properties type, it is going to be a string. You can also find these informations in the resource section in the CloudFormation documentation. And I will show you that when we get to the resource section. The next parameter we are going to create is our database name. And if I scroll down here, under additional configuration, you'll see the initial database name. That is the parameters we are creating here. And for this parameter, the allow pattern is going to be the same as this up here. So I'm going to copy it and paste it down here. The description is also going to be the same. I'm going to copy this, copy it, and paste it down there under the constraint description. For the default value, you can give your database name anything you want. I'll call it application DB. And for the description, I'll call it MySQL database name. The maximum length is going to be 64 and the minimum length is going to be 1. and the type is going to be a string. The next property we are going to enter is our RDS database username. And in the RDS management console, if you go all the way to the top, you will see the master username here, and that is what we are creating these parameters for. So for the allow pattern, I'm going to copy this again, copy this, and paste it down here. And for the constraint description, I'm going to copy this as well. And I'm going to paste it down here. And we are going to enter a default value. And we are going to give it a description. I'll call it username for MySQL database access. For the maximum length, it is going to be 16. And for the minimum length, it is going to be 1. And no echo, we are going to type true. And what no echo means is when you are entering this value, it won't show the words you are typing. For example, under the master password, if I type anything in there, it is showing it as those dots. So that is what the no echo does. Next, we are going to enter the type, and it is going to be a string. One thing I want to mention is my perimeters are sorted in alphabetical order, so it is easier for me to find them in the template. But if you want to organize your perimeters according to how it is listed in the RDS console, you can do that as well. The next perimeter we are going to create is for the database password. For the database password, for the allow pattern, it is slightly different from this, and this is what it looks like. And what this means is that the value of our database password can have a combination of lowercase and uppercase letters and numbers. Next, we are going to enter our constraint description. And for this constraint description, I'm going to enter must contain only alphanumerical characters. Next, we will enter the default value for our database password. And for the description, we are going to enter password for MySQL database access. For the maximum length, it is going to be 41. And the minimum length, it is going to be 8. And for no echo, we are going to type true to hide this password. And for type, it is going to be a string. Next, we are going to enter the perimeters for the database retention period. For the constraint description, your retention period can be between 0 days and 35 days. And I'm going to type something like this. And for the default value, since I don't want to back up my database, I'm just going to type 0. When you have 0 in there, it means you don't want to back it up. And for the description, I'm going to type a description like this. For the maximum value, we are going to enter 35. And for the minimum value, we are going to enter 0. And for the type, it is going to be a number. The next parameter we are going to create is for the database allocated storage. And if I scroll down in the RDS console, you will see the storage here, and the default value is 20. So what we can do is, under the constraint description, we will type something like this. And for the default value, we are going to enter 20. Under the description, we are going to enter the size of the database. Under maximum value, we are going to enter 1024. And under minimum value, we can enter 5. And for the type, it is going to be a number because the value we are entering here is a number. I'm going to type number in here. Next, the parameter we are going to enter is for the database instance class. If you look in the RDS console, the database instance class is here, and if you select this drop down, you will see all the list of the database instance class. That is what we are trying to do here. I've only select few instance class here to include in my template, but you can always list as many instance class as you want. For the constraint description, we are going to enter must select a valid database instance type. And for the default value, we want it to be dbt2 micro. I'm going to copy this and paste it down here. And for the description, I'm going to enter the database instance type. And for the type, it is going to be a string. The last parameter we are going to create in our RDS template is the multi-AZ parameter. And if you come to the RDS management console, under availability and durability, here you can select the option whether you want to create your RDS database in another availability zone. So that is the parameter we are creating here. And the value this parameter can have is true or false. And I've listed them here. So for the constraint description, we can type must be either true or false. And for the default value, I'm going to type false. For the description, I'm going to enter something like this. And for type, it is going to be a string. And this is all the parameters we are creating for our RDS database. You can always create as many parameters as you want for the different options in the RDS database. But for now, these parameters are good enough. Then let's save our template. I'm going to save it. Once you have saved your template, next we can create our metadata section. Download this reference metadata template from the description and copy this metadata and paste it into your template. I'm going to paste it here. And I'm going to minimize this. Remember we discussed in the VPC lecture that one of the things we can use metadata for is to group our parameters. And that is exactly what we are doing here. We have created two labels for our parameters. For the first label, we call it export VPC stack name, and we put the export VPC stack name parameter, which is down here in that label. For the second label, we call it database parameters. And for this label, we put all the parameters we created for our database. For example, if you look at database identifier, it is that. Database name, it is that. So for all this parameter we created, we put those parameters under this database parameter label. This is how we are going to use the metadata section in our RDS database. Next, let's create our resource section. I'm going to go to the resource. Download this reference RDS resource template from the description. And once you have downloaded, copy the two resources I have in there. I'm going to copy them. Then come into your template and paste it on that resource. So make sure you come to the beginning and paste it in there, and you should have the indent like this. I'm going to minimize this, and we are going to enter the values for our resources. The first resource we are going to create is for our database subnet group. And our database subnet groups allow us to specify the subnets that we want to put our database in. So for the subnet group description, I'm going to enter subnet group for RDS database. And next we are going to enter our subnet IDs. The subnet IDs will allow us to specify the subnets that we want to put our database in. According to our reference architecture, we want to put our database in private subnet 3 and private subnet 4. So under subnet IDs, I'm going to use the intrinsic function to import in my subnet IDs from my VPC template. And remember, we did that in the NAT gateway lecture. To import in a value, you enter it like this. I'm going to press enter and enter this value. From the last lecture, we learned that we can use the import value intrinsic function to import a value we export from our VPC template. And this is how you enter it. The next subnet we want to put our database in is the private subnet 4. So I'm going to copy this value. And I'm just going to come right below it. And I'm going to paste it under it. And don't forget to change this to private subnet 4. And we are going to enter our tags. For the key, I'll give it a name. And for value, I'll call it database subnets. And finally, we are going to create our database instance. And if you want to find this resource in the CloudFormation documentation, I'm going to go back to my CloudFormation documentation. And I'm just going to minimize this. I'm going to select template reference and select resource and property reference and scroll down to R. I'm going to scroll to R. I'm going to select RDS. The first resource we created was the RDS DB subnet group, and you can see it up here. And remember what we discussed in the previous lecture. For example, for the database subnet group logical name, this is the name I created for this resource in my CloudFormation template. So for every logical name you see, those names you can create any name you want in there. But just make sure anytime you are referencing that resource in your CloudFormation template, make sure you are referencing the right name you gave it. For our database instance, if you look under the CloudFormation documentation, you will see the database instance. And if you select it and scroll down to the YAML template, you will see the resource name and all the properties that comes with that resource. So I've selected a list of properties that we are going to be using because we don't need to use everything. And a good thing about how our template is set up is we have already created the parameters for most of this property up there. So all we need to do down here is just reference them. The first property we are going to create for our RDS instance is the allocated storage. And remember, we created a parameter for this property in our template, and we call that parameter database allocated storage. For example, if I scroll up, and you are going to see the parameter for that property up here. So what I will do is I'll just reference that parameter down here. So for the allocated storage, I'm going to use the ref function, and I'm going to reference that parameter. And the next property we are going to enter is we can specify the availability zone where we want to put our master database. For our availability zone, you can enter it like this. And remember from the VPC lecture, we are using the select to select the first availability zone in the region where we are launching this template. Next, we are going to enter the value for the backup retention period. For this, we are going to reference what we created in the perimeter. So I'll use the ref function and I'll reference the database backup retention period. Next, we are going to create our instance class and I'm going to reference our instance class perimeter. Next, we are going to create the properties for our database instance identifier and we are going to reference the perimeter we created for it. I'm going to use the ref function again. Next, we are going to enter our database name and we are going to reference the perimeter we created for it. And next, we are going to enter our database subnet group name and we will also reference the perimeter we created for it. For the engine we want to use for this database instance, we are going to enter MySQL. And for the engine version, we are going to enter 5.7.31. For example, if I go in the RDS console and I scroll up, under the MySQL engine version, if you select this drop down, we are entering this number in there. That is what this means. The next property we are going to enter is our master username. I'm going to use the ref function. And I'm going to reference the perimeter we created for it. We call it database user. The next property we are going to enter for this resource is our master username password. And I'm going to use the ref function to reference the perimeter that I created for it. And next we are going to enter the value for our multi-AZ property. We are going to use the ref function to reference the perimeter we created for it. And finally, we are going to enter the value for our VPC security groups property. Remember, we export this value in our VPC template. To import this value into our RDS template, we are going to enter it like this. And this is how you will import this value from your VPC template. You are going to use the import value intrinsic function and the sub to substitute this for our VPC stack name. And this security group resource in our VPC, we called it database security group. And once you've entered this value, save your template. I'm going to select file and I'm going to save my template. Next, we are going to go into CloudFormation to create our RDS stack. I'm going to select the CloudFormation console and I'm going to maximize this. I'm going to select create stack with new resources. I'm going to load a template and I'll select choose file. I'm going to select my RDS template, select open and select next. And I am getting this error message. So anytime you see this red ribbon, when you try to launch your CloudFormation stack, it means something is wrong with your template. And when I read the message, it says that perimeter database password failed to satisfy constraint, must contain only alphanumerical characters. Reading this error message, I know what I did wrong in my template. So the error is coming from the perimeter database password. I'm going to go back to my CloudFormation template. Then I'm going to scroll to the perimeter database password. This is the database password. And remember, we said the minimum length this password can have is 8. And in the default value, I only have 7 characters in there. I'm going to enter one more number. So that makes it 8. I'm going to save my template. And once you've saved your template, I'm going to minimize this and go back to CloudFormation. I'm going to select upload a template file. I'm going to choose my file again. I'll select my RDS template, select open, and click next. And you can see now it is working. I'm going to enter my stack name. I'll call it RDS. And under perimeter, I'm going to enter VPC for my export VPC stack name. And for the database parameter, these are the default value we entered in our template. You can change this default value before you create your stack, but I'm just going to leave everything as default. Scroll down and click next. And I'm going to scroll down again, click next. And I'll scroll down one more time and select create stack. And it is now creating our RDS stack. I'm going to refresh. And it is creating the resources in our RDS template. I'm going to give it some time to finish creating these resources. After waiting some time, it has created all the resources in my RDS template, and it is saying create complete. So everything is fine. Now let's right click to open a new tab. And in the management console, I'm going to select services, and I'm going to select RDS under database. And when we go to RDS, we should have one instance running. And there you go. You can see database instance. We have one running. If I select it, and you can see the database identifier name we gave it, which is MySQL DB that I gave it, is right here. I'm going to select it. Under connectivity and security, you are going to see your endpoint here. For security groups, you can see it is importing our security group from our VPC stack. And if I right click on this, this should be pointing to the database security group in our VPC. And there you go. It is pointing to the database security group. I'm going to close that. What else do we need to check? You can also see here that this RDS is in our test VPC and it is in these two subnets. If I right click to open these subnets in a new tab, they should be private subnet 3 and private subnet 4. I'm going to right click to open them in a new tab. And that subnet is private subnet 4. And let me open the second one. And that subnet is private subnet 3. So far, everything looks good. You can also see the availability zone we put it in, which is US East 1A. That is because we specified index 0 when we were selecting the availability zone where we want to put this RDS. Next, I'm just going to close all this. And I'm going to go back to my CloudFormation stack. And to delete your RDS stack, just select it and select delete. And I'm going to delete this stack. Once the RDS stack has been deleted, then you can delete your NAT gateway. And once your NAT gateway has been deleted, you can delete your VPC. This is how you create an RDS database using CloudFormation. Thank you, and I'll see you in the next lecture. Bye.